On the right, Ken Dryden, the equally brilliant superstar of the Montreal Canadians, the backbone of their Stanley Cup triumph in 1971. Acclaimed the outstanding player of those playoffs, the NHL's Rookie of the Year in his first full season, and the NHL's top goaltender over the 1973 regular schedule. And now it's Stanley Cup 73, the final series. The Chicago Blackhawks versus the Montreal Canadiens. Esposito against Dryden in what was expected to be one of the greatest goaltender battles in Stanley Cup history. But first, let's see how Montreal and Chicago reached the 1973 Stanley Cup Final Series. Chicago, first in the NHL's West Division, eliminated the St. Louis Blues in a quarterfinal series with Stan Mikita just back from a broken heel playing a major role. Meanwhile, over in the NHL's East Division, the New York Rangers and the Boston Bruins met in another quarterfinal series. Boston had beat New York in a battle for second place, and on top of that, only a year earlier had defeated the Rangers for the Stanley Cup. Hence, the Bruins, led by the incomparable Bobby Orr, were expected to eliminate the Rangers and take dead aim at their third Stanley Cup in 4 years. But Brad Park, who sets up Rod Gilbert for a New York goal here, and the rest of the Rangers had other ideas. New York won this series in 5 games, taking 3 of their wins right on Boston ice. Even though the Bruins lost superstar Phil Esposito with torn knee ligaments in Game 2, the New York victory was a startling upset. The Rangers hadn't defeated the Bruins in a playoff series since 1940. Goaltender Ed Jacquemin was sensational for New York, time and again stopping the Bruins shooters, who collectively were the NHL's highest scoring club during the 1973 regular season. In still another quarterfinal series, the Montreal Canadiens faced the Buffalo Sabres. It was quite remarkable that the Sabres were even in the Stanley Cup playoffs in only their 3rd season of NHL play, but few gave the Buffalo club much chance against the NHL's East Division champions. However, the Sabres, backed by Roger Crozier's goaltending and led by their exciting French connection line of Gilles Perreault, Richard Martin, and Rainy Robert, who between them scored 11 of Buffalo's 16 goals, extended the Canadiens to 6 games. Even in defeat, the appreciative Buffalo fans stood to applaud the tremendous efforts of their Cinderella Sabres. On to the semifinals, and in one series, the New York Rangers met the Chicago Blackhawks. The Rangers, fresh from their upset win over the Boston Bruins, were now favored to take the Blackhawks, and they started off winning the first game on Chicago ice. But that was to be the only New York win. Led by Dennis Hull, who scored 6 goals and 11 assists in the quarter and semifinals, and anchored by Tony Esposito's sensational goaltending, Chicago bounced back to take 4 straight games. In the other semifinal, Montreal played Philadelphia Flyers, who had eliminated the Minnesota North Stars, with Flyer goalie Doug Favell compiling a brilliant 1.8 goals against average in that quarterfinal. Ken Dryden had to be sensational against Philadelphia. The Flyers, led by Bobby Clarke with 104 points and Rick McLeish with 100 points, had the NHL's best power play over the 1973 season. But as usual, Dryden was at his stingy best. The colorful and aggressive Flyers, the most penalized team in the NHL's 56-year history, were beaten by the high-scoring, speedy Canadiens in 5 games, 2 of which had to be settled in overtime. And so in the 1973 Stanley Cup Finals, the stage was set for the great goaltending battle between Dryden and Esposito. But the goaltending duel predicted by press, players, and fans failed to materialize. In fact, the Blackhawks led the highly favored Canadians 2-0 after only 62 seconds of the opening game. And in these first two games, both played at the Montreal Forum, there were 16 goals in all. Hardly what the traditionalists would call close-checking Stanley Cup hockey. But in the end, the Forum fans loved it because their beloved Canadians came away with 8-3 and 4-1 victories to give them a commanding two-game lead in the series. Goaltenders battle? No way. Instead of shutouts, it was more like shootouts. And when the series moved to Chicago Stadium, for the next two games, powerful Montreal, a team which had lost only 10 times during the entire 78-game regular season, was looking for a 4-game sweep of the best-of-7 series. Game 3 in Chicago Stadium is standing room only as usual. And for Montreal's captain, Henri Richard, this was his 165th Stanley Cup playoff game, establishing a new NHL record. Into the action now, and the Hawks' Dennis Hull attempts to get away from a familiar shadow, Claude LaRose. Referee Art Skoll whistles a delayed penalty, and with Claude LaRose in the penalty box, Chicago has a power play situation. Watch closely as Dennis Hull beats Dryden and makes it 1-0 for the Blackhawks. J.P. Bordelot then made it 2-0, and the Hawks showed an aggressiveness unmatched in the previous two games. But now Art Skoll has spotted an off-camera slashing penalty on Chicago's Dennis Hull to give Montreal the man advantage. Watch in slow motion as defenseman Bill White takes off to make it 3-0 on a backhand shot from a seemingly impossible angle. Here it is again, with Montreal goalie Ken Dryden probably still wondering how White scored that shorthanded goal. Dennis Hull was still in the penalty box when the Blackhawks scored still another shorthanded goal to make the score 4-0. Number 21, Stan Mikita, pulled the trigger, and his play, despite a very badly injured finger, was simply inspirational. Into the second period, and rookie Len Frigg, number 19, playing in his first Stanley Cup game, sets up John Marks, another playoff rookie, to make it 5-0. That power play goal came at only 2:08 of the second period, giving Chicago an apparently insurmountable lead. But Montreal refused to quit. Tony Esposito was called upon to make save after save as the Canadians fought desperately to get something going. Frank Mahovlich finally beats Esposito to make it 5-1, the 5th consecutive playoff game in which he has scored. And then he's robbed at another great scoring opportunity. Here it is again, rookie Len Frigg diving to make that spectacular stick save. Now in the third period, the Canadians are still firing all out despite the 5-1 score. Yvan Cournoyer makes it 5-2, and that was his 12th playoff goal. Guy Lapointe's goal stuns the Chicago crowd and makes it 5-3. And just 46 seconds later, Jacques Lemaire narrowed it to 5-4, throwing the Chicago stadium into a numb silence. Late in the game, Frank Mahovlich misses the perfect chance to cap Canadians' sensational comeback and put the game into overtime. And with Dryden out for an extra attacker, Dennis Hull hits the open net from almost the other end of the rink to make it 6-4. The Blackhawk fans breathe a sigh of relief, and Jim Pappin added another empty net goal to make the final score 7-4. Game 4, with Montreal leading the series 2-1. The Canadians struck early in this game, Mark Tardif scoring at 1:08. This was to be an almost perfect game for Montreal. No matter how hard the Blackhawks tried, the Canadians always seemed to have a checker in the right place at the right time to stop them. And if the Hawks did get past the defense, they still couldn't beat Ken Dryden, the Canadians' giant-sized goaltender. At the other end of the ice, Dryden's counterpart, Tony Esposito, was also showing why he and Dryden are generally acclaimed as the National Hockey League's 2 best goalkeepers. But the Canadians, led by Lemaire, Cournoyer, and Tardif, kept on applying terrific pressure. Watch this Esposito save coming up on Jacques Lemaire. Veteran hockey observers can't remember such a sustained blitz. It's just a question of how long Tony Esposito can keep the Blackhawks in this game. It had to come. Yvan Cournoyer, with his 13th goal, finally gets the puck past the sensational Chicago goaltender, and less than 2 minutes later, Montreal added to its margin. A tired and dejected Tony Esposito fishes the puck out of his goal after Chuck Lefley's sizzling slap shot made the score 3-0. Esposito was playing a brilliant game, and his mates never stopped trying, but this game belonged to the Canadians. Into the third period now, and Claude LaRose, better known for his checking, is about to make it 4-0. And that's the way it finished to give Montreal a whopping 3-1 lead in the series, and goaltender Ken Dryden records his first shutout in Stanley Cup play. Now the series shifted back to the Montreal Forum, with Canadians hoping to wrap it up on their home ice. The fans were about to see one of the wildest playoff games ever played. For the Blackhawks, there was no tomorrow. They had to win to stay alive. Montreal goes ahead 1-0 on Frank Mahovlich's goal after only 2 minutes and 47 seconds of play. Taking up where they left off in Chicago, the Canadians buzz around Esposito's goal, and Tony once again frustrates his tormentors. Now it's Chicago's turn, and Dennis Hull, one of the hardest shooters in hockey, unleashes one of his blinding slap shots. Nikita's goal made it 2-1, but before the period was over, the Canadians' Peter Mahovlich tied the score. And now, after the teams exchanged goals early in the second period, the score is tied 3-all. That's rookie Murray Wilson about to set up Claude LaRose for the 4-3 go-ahead goal. LaRose's second goal of the game. Stan Mikita got that goal back quickly, but here comes the fellow they've nicknamed the Roadrunner, Yvan Cournoyer. And bang! That was Cournoyer's 14th playoff goal, tying the Stanley Cup record set by teammate Frank Mahovlich in the 1971 series. But the Montreal lead didn't last long. A beautiful goal. A picture play effort by Chicago's Jim Pappen again ties the score. The pace was breathtaking. Montreal counters with a relentless barrage of shots on the Chicago goal, but as the play comes back to the Canadiens' end, number 26, Pierre Bouchard, catches the referee's eye and draws a penalty. 4:46 left in the second period. Chicago has a man advantage, and the old master, Stan Mikita, wins a big faceoff. Rookie Len Frigg makes it 6-5, and before the period ended, Pappen scored again to make it 7-5. The 8 goals in the second period set a Stanley Cup record. Not exactly the goaltenders' battle which had been predicted. And that's Serge Savard making it 7-6 early in the third. The Forum fans were tense. They came to see the Canadians win the cup. But here comes another Blackhawk goal. Number 6, Lou Angotti makes it 8-6, and nobody can remember a Stanley Cup final game in recent years which was so wide open. Frank Mahovlich steals the puck and passes ahead to Henri Richard, and the Canadiens captain makes no mistake. With over 8 minutes to play, it's 8-7, but the Canadiens couldn't beat Esposito in the remaining time. And so after 5 games, Montreal now led the series 3-2. Back in Chicago for Game 6, where the Blackhawk fans gave their team an overwhelming standing ovation before the game got underway. Pitt Martin, just out of the penalty box, shoots the Hawks into the lead, and Chicago Stadium goes wild. Jim Pappen controls the puck in back of Dryden, and here comes another goal by Martin to make it 2-0. Near the end of the first period, Chicago is threatening to add to its margin. Defenseman Jacques Laperriere is back in action for this game after breaking his nose in 7 places in Game 1 of this final series. Less than a minute to play in the period with a face-off in the Chicago zone. Veteran Henri Richard scores with just 12 seconds left in the period. Psychologically, a big goal for the Canadians, and now it's early in the second period with the ever-dangerous Kit Martin on the attack. And that was Claude LaRose who slid into the net as he came back to check. LaRose had been playing great two-way hockey for the Canadians and unfortunately suffered a broken leg in this mishap. Pete Mahavelic's deflection ties the score. Once again, the Canadians prove their ability to come from behind. And they continue to forecheck fiercely, looking for that go-ahead goal. Lepley checks Makita. Pete Mahavelic to Régin Houle, and it's 3-2 for the Canadians. Now Chicago has to come back, and keep your eye on the Hawks rookie, number 17, Dave Crisco. Crisco thought referee Lloyd Gilmore was disallowing his goal. And when the Canadians realized, in fact, that the goal was going to stand, they stormed the officials. Here it is again from a different angle. As Crisco goes for the referee, Cournoyer tries to skate through the glass to get at the goal judge. And volatile Henri Richard displays his displeasure to the referee. But the score stands, and it's Montreal 3, Chicago 3. Before the period was over, each team scored again to tie it 4-4. Frank Mahavelic scored for the Canadians, and here's Kit Martin scoring his third goal of the game, a hat trick. With that goal, the Martin-Papin-Hull line established a new Stanley Cup scoring record of 55 points. Into the third period now, and here comes another Stanley Cup record. Yvan Cournoyer makes it 5-4 with his 15th goal of the 73 playoffs. And when the series was over, Cournoyer was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy as the outstanding player of these playoffs. The Canadians, coached by Scotty Bowman, are less than 10 minutes away from their 18th Stanley Cup if they can hold on to the lead. On a pass from Cournoyer, Mark Tardif makes it 6-4, and Chicago's hopes are fading fast as time is running out. Once again, the Montreal Canadiens have won the Stanley Cup, hockey's most cherished trophy. As the vanquished Blackhawks congratulate the victorious Canadians, Chicago coach Billy Ray salutes the loyal Hawk fans as he leaves the ice. And National Hockey League President Clarence Campbell presents the historic Stanley Cup to Captain Henri Richard, a record 11th time the silver-haired veteran has been on a Stanley Cup winning Canadian team. And once more, the Stanley Cup comes back to Montreal. The Canadians, truly the National Hockey League's team with a tradition, celebrate their 18th Stanley Cup triumph, a record that brought over 500,000 Montreal fans to cheer their dearly beloved Canadians. Along St. Catherine Street, it was literally wall-to-wall fans who came to cheer sport's greatest prize, the Stanley Cup.